Hello and welcome. I'm your host, author Ryan M. Oliver, and this is the Mighty Books Podcast. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Mighty Books Podcast. Today with me, I have a repeat guest. Her name is Connie Connally. So, Connie Hampton Connally holds a BA in English from the University of Washington and an MFA from Antioch University. She has taught high school English and elementary music, worked as an editor, led workshops at writers' conferences, and written both fiction and nonfiction. Her debut novel, The Songs We Hide, was published by Coffeetown Press in 2018. Fire Music is Miss Connally's second novel. Miss Connally and her husband live in Tacoma, Washington. They travel frequently to visit their three adult sons and their families. Miss Connally is currently writing a novel set in Andine, Peru, where her second son lives. Hi, Connie. How are you?
Good. Hi, Ryan. Thanks a lot for having me here today.
Absolutely. It's fun to see you and see how everything's progressing. So it's exciting about your new book.
Yeah, I'm really happy. It was a long time in the making, and it's wonderful to have it released now.
Yeah, it's cool. It's really cool to see the progression of people I've talked to in the past. Because I know when we last talked, you had just mentioned fire music. I don't even know if you
Mhm.
had actually told if we had talked about it on the podcast or if it was pre or post hitting the record button. But you were starting to work on it, which was really cool.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Well,
Cool to see the evolution. So we know the title. It's called Fire Music, which I will say is a really cool name, just by the way. And then
thank you.
you're welcome. And then the cover is gorgeous.
Thanks. I think
Yes.
so too. It was actually designed by a wonderful graphic artist here in Tacoma, who some of your listeners may be familiar with the Beautiful Angle poster series in
Hmm.
Tacoma. Anyway, Lance Kagi designed it, and he just is fabulously talented, and he's a friend of mine, so it was wonderful to have him involved.
Very
So,
cool. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's very striking, which is nice. It's eye-catching, which is what we need when you when you're selling a book. They say don't judge a book by its cover, but everyone does.
yes, everyone does judge books by their cover.
At least for initially, they pick it up. After that,
Yeah,
it's got to have
yeah.
some substance. So, can you go into a little bit about what fire music is about?
Sure.
Awesome.
So, yeah, Fire Music is a dual timeline story, and it is partly historical, and it's set mainly in Hungary, same as The Songs We Hide, my previous book. And Fire Music is a story of family secrets, and ultimately it's a redemption story. The main character, Antal Varga, is a violinist, and in the earlier thread of the story, he's 17 at the brutal end of World War II. And in the later thread of the book, he's 78.
Wow.
So here is the premise, just a little short, succinct statement that I like to have for the
Yeah.
book. During the deadly siege of Budapest, secrets lodge in a teenage violinist's heart and in the shattering music he writes. 60 years later, young relatives ask him for the music's story. Is the story too painful to tell, or can pain, like music, be recomposed as beauty?
Mm, I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I enjoy that you're talking about with especially with World War II veterans, the pain of discussing what happened. If you've
Yes.
read any other, historical books, I read Flags of Our Fathers. It's been a while now, probably about 10 years since I read
Mhm.
it last.
Mhm.
But the
Mhm.
survivors or the survivor, one of the survivors of the actual flag raising, his son
Mhm.
wrote the book. So he talked about how his dad never spoke of his time in on Iwo Jima in fighting in the Pacific Theater because what we think was, I think, it's probably just too painful to talk about, to talk
Oh,
to.
yeah.
But what's
Yeah.
crazy is how it's kind of counterintuitive though, or counterproductive. Those people who don't talk about it and can't have someone to relate with, it tends to eat at them a little bit more. So
Yes.
yeah.
And so in Fire and Music, Antal Varga, the main character of the story, he was not in the army. He was too young for that during the story, but he did live through his city being under siege. And so part of my book describes him living in the basement of his apartment building with about 50 other people, the residents of the building. And so for 6 or 7 weeks, they are all crowded together in this basically a cellar, no electricity, running out of food, no heat, and just extremely difficult situations, having to dash outside and pick up snow to melt for water. Meanwhile, the battle itself is getting closer and closer, not just to their city. The battle is in their city and it's getting closer and closer to their home.
Mhm.
And so during that hellfire going on and just the mass destruction of their city was when Antal lived through not only that trauma, but some of the biggest strains in some of the most important relationships in
Mhm.
his life
Yeah.
during that time and the months afterwards. And so, yes, there was a lot that he didn't want to talk about later in life, like the vets, kind of on a different level, but it was still ran very deep.
Yeah, the experiences I'm sure is very similar to, I mean, being one who's fighting in the war versus you're a civilian living through the destruction of your town. And it's got to be a lot harder in a way where yes, you might not be the one performing the fighting, you're not in the mix fighting, which is a different animal altogether. Because taking a life versus having loved ones die, I mean, it's all both tragic, but
Yeah.
having your whole family together and then fearing for not just yourself, but literally your entire family and that of your neighbors. Your whole world is literally on fire in this case. I mean, that
Yeah.
is got to be the most terrifying thing anyone can really go through in a lifetime.
It was very, very frightening for them. And part of what really, really compounded the difficulty was that then after after Hungary had lost the war, then they came out of their bomb shelters and there was a Soviet occupation going
Mm.
on,
Oh gosh.
which was really, really hard because unfortunately the Soviet soldiers were very well known for looting and raping. So
Mhm.
it was extremely scary.
Yeah.
And and also the shortages were still going on. So the hunger went on for a long time. It was just a very, very dark time. And unfortunately, the Hungarians could not really look forward to it getting much better. So yeah, it was a really difficult time, kind of hard to write about in a lot of ways because it was just so oppressive in many ways. And yet I loved writing about these people who were still creative, still musicians, trying to use their music to kind of lift their own spirits and the spirits of the people around them.
Hmm.
And if I could just jump in here with another question that people often ask
Yeah,
me is,
absolutely.
or comments that they have made actually as they have started reading the book,
Okay.
they have said that for them as readers, since the wartime story is pretty painful, one thing that has helped is the movement back and forth in the story between the earlier timeline and the later timeline,
Right.
because there's the little more relief because the later timeline, though there's a lot of tension in it, it's a different kind of struggle.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit of a break, and in some cases, a little bit of comic relief now and then.
as you need during stressful times.
Yeah, yeah, but also just kind of the added quality of knowing that, okay, this man will survive because we know he made it to age 78.
Yeah, at least. It's just the other people around that we're now curious about,
Yeah,
what they're
yeah,
doing. And I
right.
think I like, you mentioned they're really pulling towards their creativity to try to lift their spirits.
Yeah.
And kind of going back to the flags of our fathers, what he mentioned, I think him and his father had a couple of good conversations about his time over on in during the war, and he said that really staying busy and having a
Yeah.
purpose and
Yeah.
having some kind of an interest or a goal in mind of this, I have a purpose here. Like he ran a funeral home, so a local funeral home, which is kind of a
Mm,
morbid thing, but he unfortunately was kind of used to death at that point after World War
right.
II.
Yeah.
But he held the hands of everyone grieving as they
Hmm.
came through, and he saw people from the time they were young kids all the way to the time they died, and helped his
Yeah.
family through all that. And he was like, "Well,
Right.
people need me
Yes.
to stay strong, so I can escort their family members, to be buried properly."
Yeah.
And it seemed like that kind of purpose, like someone who's a gifted
Mm-hmm.
musician, this is to
Yeah.
share and bring joy. So if I
Yes.
can bring joy to someone else, that almost seems to be a drawing factor in dealing with times of hardship
Yeah.
or enduring the aftermaths of trauma. It's not
Hmm.
necessarily, okay, yeah, I'm sad and depressed and I'm not doing great, but I'm here because I'm supporting these people, and that's usually
Right.
what keeps them going. We're a very social animal. We have to find purpose in each other. Did you want to I know you mentioned you wanted to read the first scene. You
Yeah.
want to do that now?
Sure. In
Cool.
fact, this would
Love
be
it.
a
Love to hear
good
it.
time to do it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think
Since I've
so.
just described what the book is about.
Yeah, because we're kind of
Okay.
jiving in right now, so go for it.
All right. So the title of the book is Fire Music, and here is chapter one,
Cool.
The American. August 17th, 2006. Antal Varga crossed the mosaic floor of the Budapest Opera House, heading for one of the side exits he'd used for more than 50 years. His left shoulder hurt, and he transferred his violin case to his right hand. He hadn't played the violin here today, only adjudicated an audition. But after the lootings and searches he'd lived through, he didn't let the instrument out of his sight for long. Somewhere behind him, a woman shouted, "Sir!" It sounded like English, a tourist yelling in the opera house. Varga began to turn, but his neck cramped. Well, let her go on yelling. He was heading home. Ur! He paused. She was shouting in Hungarian now. Varga Ur! Her pronunciation was off, but she was calling him. He pivoted his full body to avoid twisting his neck. A blonde woman who looked to be in her mid-30s rushed toward him, jeans, wrinkled blue t-shirt, canvas bag swinging from her shoulder. Probably American. He often saw Americans here. Amid the opera house's marble and gilding, they looked like street sweepers who had dashed in to use the toilets. But this one, somehow, knew his name. The woman stopped directly in front of him. Varga Antal? She had known to use the surname first, unusual for a foreigner. Egan, Varga said. Yes. Do you speak English? No. The woman sighed as though in some great dilemma. He offered German. Sprechen Sie Deutsch? No. Ruski? He asked. No. She said it in Hungarian then. Nem. He asked her in Hungarian what she needed, but she couldn't answer. They were accomplishing nothing here. He gestured toward the door, trying to remember enough English to leave gracefully. Sorry, I go. No, she clutched his sleeve. Please, Karam. He pulled himself free and took a step back. The foreigner pressed her hand to her chest. Lisa, Denman. She riffled through her canvas bag, shook her head, and tried to say something in Hungarian, but he did not understand her. Then she stopped and righted her intonation. Varga Sándor. Antal Varga's hand tightened on the violin case. Istenem, he rasped. My God. It had been 60 years since Sándor fled Hungary, 20 since he died. And how much time had passed with anyone even saying his name? The woman's impossible words rushed on, 20 English to 1 Hungarian. He gestured insistently toward the door. God in heaven, if she would just shut up and follow him several blocks, his grandson could interpret between them, at least for a few minutes. Varga tried German again, shouting now, Come! It worked. She followed. Now I'm going to skip ahead about a page.
Sure, sure.
And now Varga and the woman, Lisa, are in the restaurant where Varga's grandson, Christoph, works. And they are waiting for Christoph to turn around and be able to come over and talk to them. And while they're waiting, okay, picking up again now, Lisa slid the bag off her shoulder, searched through it, pulled out a folded paper, and held it out to him. He set the violin case on the floor and opened the sheet. It was an old page of music manuscript paper, yellowed and torn at the bottom, brittle in his hands. An untitled melody had been jotted in blue ink, treble clef, one sharp. He adjusted his glasses and read the first line. The paper shook in his hand. He hurried through the second line, third, and then the slurring tones in the fourth line. Jesus, he whispered. He skipped to the bottom line where the trill would be. There it was, and the repeat symbol, yes. He turned it over, finding the 3 last familiar lines, and under it all, in the time-smudged notation of his own teenage hand, his signature, Varga Antal, 1945. Yes, 1945, when his world was on fire. He stared at Lisa, gripping the paper. How did you get this? But of course, she understood not a word he said.
Mhm.
So I'll stop there.
And now I want to know more.
Good, good.
And now I want to know more. I love the confusion between the languages. It's so painful. It's like in a good way. You did a very good job of describing the frustration that people would have, and it's so funny with I know Americans, kind of off topic, but Americans not knowing really more than one language, and then you go to Europe and they speak 3
Yeah, yeah,
easily, one of them being English
yeah.
to accommodate Americans most of the
Yes,
time.
but Varga being from the generation that he was,
Yeah,
he would have learned German growing up.
right.
That was the kind of the most common neighbor language.
Yeah,
But once the Soviets moved in and once Hungary became communist, it was really frowned on to learn English.
yeah,
And he would have had been required to learn some Russian.
right.
So
It makes
that's what
sense.
he knew. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense for his region and the time
Yes.
frame. Russian, German, and Hungarian definitely sound like the 3 that he needed to learn.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And then his grandson, yes, would have learned English.
Yeah,
And
because
in fact, his grandson knew several languages.
yeah. Yep. I've met many people from Europe who definitely speak at least 2, if not 3
Yes.
languages.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think it's very interesting. But I'm very interested in the timeline and how
Hmm.
you wrote the timeline. So it's one's
Hmm.
1945 during the Battle of Budapest, and then you've got 2006, I believe the
Yes.
time frame
Yes.
is. Okay,
Right.
2006. So when you wrote this, did you write from 1945 to 2006 and then kind of fold it on top of each other?
that, oh wow, Ryan, it was what a task. I mean,
But
it was really, really hard. And I'll just kind of tell briefly the story of how this emerged.
yeah.
This actually, fire music actually I began writing it way back in 2006 before I wrote the song
Wow.
We Hide. And back then I had been doing some reading of Hungarian history, and I got very interested in the year of the siege of Budapest. And so I had it in mind to write a teenage novel
Hmm.
set during the siege. And I had it in mind to write about a teenage violinist. So I did some research and I wrote the novel with a 17-year-old violinist as the main character. And I wrote it as a novel for teenagers.
Okay.
So kind of envisioning a readership of 13, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds. And I had a verbal agreement from a publisher
Hmm.
who took it on, and I began going through the editorial process with them. And during that time, while they were working on it, I began writing the songs we hide.
Hmm.
Then some glitches came up with the process of my novel about the siege of Budapest. And so they canceled. They said,
Oh,
no, we're not going to publish it. And so that was frustrating, but since by that time I had begun writing the songs we hide, I decided to just keep going on that. And I told myself that after I was done with the songs we hide, I would come back to the fire music story, which at that time was titled The Bomb Shelter Quintet.
oh, okay.
It then took a long time to write the songs we hide. And when I came back to the Bomb Shelter Quintet, quote unquote,
Yeah.
I had made some other discoveries. One discovery was that I didn't want to write it as a teenage novel. I really preferred working with adult stories. And so I had the idea to write it from the viewpoint of an older man looking back on what had happened to him.
Yeah.
But
To me, that sounds more interesting. I actually, older man looking back on his life. I love that aspect, the reflections, the hindsight.
right,
Yeah, I really
right.
like that.
I did too, but
Yeah.
there were a couple of quandaries that I bumped into.
Oh, yeah.
One was that I had originally thought, oh, maybe I'll write it in first person until telling the story of what happened.
Yeah.
But a big problem with that was that, guess what? Antal didn't want to talk about it. This is not a story that he would tell. And
Hmm.
so then I, needed to back off and tell it in third person,
Right.
which meant moving back and forth in time. So I began to ask around to other writers, okay, kind of like, okay, well, if I'm going to set this up as a dual timeline story with he's an old man, and then I flash back to the wartime story, how do I do that? And they said, okay, well, his life as an old man, that needs a storyline too, and that needs other characters in it. By now, things were getting really complicated. And I said, okay, so like, what percentages are we talking about here? Like, between the two timelines.
Yeah.
And this one person kind of threw out, well, probably 60% when he's an old man, 40% when he's, a young man
Young
during the
man.
war. I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to be writing this the rest of my life. I did, need to write about, what are the issues at the two different stages of his life. And actually, that turned out to be a wonderful time of discovery.
Good.
It was hard because the other two main characters in the latter day portion of the story are Lisa, who showed up
Mhm.
from
Yeah.
America and handed him this music,
Yeah.
and then Christoph, his grandson.
Okay.
And so I had to come up with issues for Christoph and Lisa, but it really ended up melding very well into Varga's own problems.
Yeah.
And the difficulty, of course, was merging the stories, moving back and forth between them, and also figuring out what had happened to Antal Varga in the intervening years.
Right.
Um, so it really was a complicated project, but I loved working on it. It's
Great.
very rewarding now to see it finished
Hmm.
after so much time has gone by, because literally 18 years have passed since I first began writing
Wow.
it. Yeah.
Wow. Well, it sounds like with the time that has passed and you doing more research, it became richer anyway.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
So,
definitely.
I mean,
Definitely.
I've always tried to find the blessings in disguise of, unfortunate, irritating, even terrible moments. And
Yeah.
sometimes, and something like that, where the book got dropped, the project got dropped, where at the
Yes.
time you're probably, very upset about it.
Oh, yeah.
And then
Right.
18 years later, you've got this product now that you're very proud of, and it probably wouldn't have been as good quality wise, well
No.
researched and all that, and thought about if you had dove on it harder back then. So I mean, it blessings in disguise. Again,
Yeah.
hindsight.
And also, adding the second timeline to it really
Oh
created
yeah,
a whole new dimension that made it deeper. I
I
will
love it.
point out that it's actually related to my first novel, The Songs We Hide,
Sure.
because in The Songs We Hide, one of the main characters is a young woman named Katalin Varga, and in Fire Music, the main character is Antal Varga, who is Katalin's older brother.
Oh, cool.
So,
Cool.
so
So
I
there's a
loved
connection.
continuing to work with that family.
Yes, it definitely sounds like it. And I love books, movies, stories that do the back and forth because it's
Mhm.
like you get both and they kind of meet in the middle
Yeah.
and you get to see the strings.
Hmm.
There's a fantasy author I really like. He hasn't finished his stuff yet because it's taking him forever, but he did the same thing with yours where he's got the older version of him and there's one or two characters he's interacting with, and I love they start asking questions, which
Hmm.
brings up more stories and more
Right.
interesting perspectives. So that
Yeah.
that kind of diving into his background almost rudely, at least
Yeah.
in this
Yeah.
in this person's story,
Yeah.
like being a little pushy.
Hmm.
And because we a lot of people, especially from the World War II time, were not as pushy and they were very reserved, which is just
Yes.
the time
Yeah.
frame. But
Hmm.
it's kind of cool when you have that pushy younger kid or
Yeah.
person who's making them come out of their shell, like tell us what happened, and then they show you in the book
Yeah.
what happens. I
Right.
love that dynamic. It kind of that word or phrase sparks a story that maybe they even forgot, and it
Yeah.
adds more richness to the entirety of the story. So
And yeah, and that's kind of how the way some of this stuff is
evolved.
brought to the surface in my book,
Yeah.
because Lisa, who is a distant relative, when she arrives, she's asking him questions about it. And then Christoph, who was serving to translate between the two of them, he says, "Well, yeah, Grandpa, I want to know about this too. And why have you never talked about this? I've never heard of these people, and what's up with that?"
Yeah. Getting familial
And
pressure, which I like.
yeah, and with Varga, it's also a case of realizing that he's always been worried about Christoph, because the young man has some pretty good-sized issues in his life. And Varga begins to realize that if he opens up a little, it'll help Christoph to open up. It's kind of like the stories back and forth
Yeah.
begin to give each other permission to come forth with what they really need to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what do you call it? Yeah, like so given permission. I'm trying to think of another word for it, but I lost it. That's okay. But how long? So you said 18 years
Yeah.
to from start to finish because of the split and everything. But when you started working on it, last we had talked,
hmm
have you been just headlong into this thing since then, just working day and night to get it done?
Well, actually, I think by the time we last spoke, I had written a lot of it
Okay.
and maybe even finished a first draft,
Okay.
but then, oh gosh, it's even kind of hard to describe the process. At
Yeah.
one point,
Yeah.
I was just getting so overwhelmed trying to move back and forth between the two stories.
Right.
So there came a point where I decided, okay, I will just rewrite the wartime story
Yeah.
all the way through because I was re not just editing it, but really changing it up.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I needed to decide what all happened in that. So I just bombed ahead and
Good.
rewrote it, and it was really long.
Hmm.
Then I went and finished the latter day story. Then I tried to put them together, and this is this is true. When I put them together, it was almost 800 double-spaced pages. So obviously it had to be really, really shortened. Some of that was fairly easy to do because there was a lot of repetition that I could see right away that
You
okay,
could
that can
fix it.
just
Yeah.
go. But then there was a lot that was much trickier to edit. So it went through a lot of revision,
Oh, I'm sure.
but
So
that finally finished.
yeah, what's the final word count?
The final word count was about 122,000 words.
Okay, yeah, that's solid.
Yeah, yeah, which is kind of long for a novel, but not that long for a historical novel.
Yeah,
So I was just really thankful that my publisher was willing to go with it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, 122,000. That's solid. I mean, I'm usually chunking away at books that are about that big, if not bigger. It's, I mean, the fatter the book,
Okay.
if you can
Yeah.
use a thing as a weapon.
Yeah. Well, and you write fantasy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, fantasy and historical tends to be longer. Um,
Yeah, that's what I'm dealing with mine right now. It's the first draft of book two is dumb. It's like 170,000 right now.
wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm trying to cut some of it down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm getting better at seeing, like you said, repetition. Is
Yeah.
this driving the story? No, then it can be removed.
Right.
So I'm gonna have to go through a couple iterations of this one, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
because it's not like yours where it is one story. Yes, it's connected by family and even historical events, but
Mm-hmm.
mine's left to right, linear story that's going all the way to
Uh-huh.
the end. So
Oh, okay.
I
Yeah.
might even have to take some of book two, cut it
Mm-hmm.
out, and put it in book three to
Yeah.
even out the amount
Yeah.
we have. But it's a huge process. It is
Yes, it
a
is.
lot of, you're basically building it and remodeling it at the same time.
Uh-huh.
That's
Right.
what you're doing. Finish this space. I don't like it. Redo it. Try again.
Right.
It is,
Right.
that's hard. So I know Hungary has been an interest of yours, because we talked about it in depth last time. So, but what inspired this? What drew you to the Battle of Budapest in particular?
Okay, well, here's another just kind of interesting precursor to this.
Sure.
Way back in 2004, 2005,
Yeah.
the Northwest Sinfonietta, which is a an orchestra in Tacoma,
Mhm.
asked me to write a children's book that
Oh,
would teach kids about orchestra music. At that time, I was teaching elementary music in a small private school in Tacoma,
right.
and I had been taking some teacher training classes in a music education methodology that was developed in Hungary. And I began doing some reading about that method and the man that developed it, which was a Hungarian composer named Zoltán Kodály. I got very interested in his life and times because he was expanding music education in Hungary during two world wars and a failed revolution and fascism and communism. And I thought, what an accomplishment and what a crazy scenario that would be. And I just got very, very interested. And when I read about the siege of Budapest, I thought, wouldn't that be interesting
Yeah.
to write about someone trying to make music during this absolute chaos?
Yeah.
When I got that idea, I certainly didn't know how difficult the research would be and how difficult the project would be.
Mm.
I think if I had known, I would have been scared off. But I'm glad I didn't know because I actually ended up loving it.
Good.
I interviewed a bunch of Hungarians
Yeah.
and got to be friends with some of them. And it was just really a wonderful project, but at no stage was it easy at all.
Nope.
But I loved working on it.
Well, I love the saying anything worth having is or anything worth having is generally hard to accomplish. I mean, it's
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
paraphrasing, but
yeah.
anything
But it's
hard is
true.
worth it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Otherwise, everyone would be doing it. Everyone's going to just write books all the time, and it's not an easy. Sometimes you're like, why am I doing this to myself? This is
That's
this
true.
is this is like
Yes.
I could be doing other things that'd be less
Yeah.
frustrating, but there's nothing better than finishing. You're like, I'm done. This
Yeah.
is my Everest.
If I could just share an anecdote here.
Heck yeah.
So when I finished my first one, The Songs We Hide, when it first came out,
Yeah.
my my very first book event with that book was actually a presentation that I gave to a group of Hungarians in Seattle.
Really
And wow, did I ever feel nervous because I was talking to them about
about their culture.
them, you know. But I went to this gathering. I read part of I read a couple of scenes to them. I answered their questions. We had a wonderful talk.
Good.
And when I came home, I told my husband, I feel like I have just done my orals for a PhD and I passed.
It's exhausting. It's
Oh, yeah.
exhausting. Yeah, when you get thrown questions and you're having to think on the spot and trying to be accurate and detailed and give someone what they need, and then you have another person, and then
Yeah.
it can be a lot. It can be a lot. But I always found that when in situations, you find you're surprised with yourself at
Yeah.
how much you know, how
Yes.
confident you are,
Yeah.
and how much people respect the fact that you're taking the time to
Right.
teach them or learn from them or about
Yeah.
them. So
Yeah.
I'm sure they loved having, someone who's not from Hungary
Mhm.
dive so deep into the Hungarian history and create some great works of historical
It
fiction.
really, it really surprised them that an
I'm
American would
sure.
do that. But it was very rewarding to see
Oh
their
yeah.
response to it.
Yeah. Well, I've also want to hear about your book launch for Fire Music. You
Oh,
said that you just
yeah.
did that. How did that go?
Yeah, it was just a few days ago, and it was down at King's Books in Tacoma.
Oh,
A
okay.
lot, a lot of people came because I have a
Great.
lot of reader friends here in Tacoma, so they all showed up, and it was wonderful. They
Good.
asked great questions. I read a few scenes from the book and talked a little bit about the Siege of Budapest. People were very interested.
Neat.
Um, and a young woman I know who plays violin, she shared some music at the launch. That was terrific.
Ooh,
And we had
cool.
some refreshments. A friend of mine helped me bake some Hungarian cookies. And it was just really a very fun and joyful event. So, and
Good.
quite a few people bought the book and were really excited to read it. It was terrific. I have to say, I've shared how long it took me to write this book and how difficult it was. And during that time, I had a lot of people saying to me, well, I read your first book and I'm really wanting to read the next one. And that
Yeah.
helped me be motivated to keep on writing.
Yep. Sometimes you need that
But
external motivation.
yeah,
Yeah. Because I don't know about you, but I definitely feel you've heard of imposter syndrome before. Like, I'm
oh
not good
yeah,
enough for this. But then when you have someone genuinely like, I really enjoyed it, I want to see what comes next. Like,
yeah,
okay, let's just stop
yeah.
being a Debbie Downer and let's just get to work. So I mean,
Yeah, that's
sometimes it
right.
just
The imposter syndrome it's a huge issue
it
and it
is.
takes forever for it to go away. I mean, I still struggle with it,
Yeah.
but yeah, having supportive readers and really interested readers really makes a
Hmm.
huge difference.
Yeah, exactly. Now with your how involved was your editor in developing this? Because I know it took you a long time to put everything together. Did they have any hand in helping you meld the two, or was this just you and working hard and trying to connect everything?
I was actually surprised by once I sent it to them, there was very little that they changed.
Great.
Yeah, but during the process, I did get some really good feedback from a few writer friends,
Excellent.
and I was very grateful for that.
Yeah.
Um, in fact, I had a couple of friends during the process of writing it. There was one point where I had finished writing it, but I knew that it needed editing, and
Right.
I wanted to submit it for a contest, and I didn't have a whole lot of time
Yeah.
to edit it, but I really did not want to send it out without having it been vetted. And
Right.
so these two friends, one of them here in Tacoma and the other one in Chicago, I asked them, look, could you guys please just read it quickly, give me feedback, mark things, and I'm gonna,
Yeah.
just work like crazy to
Oh
get
my
this in
goodness.
shape. So they did.
Yeah.
And their feedback was invaluable. And that was at a point where I was sometimes editing for 8 hours a day to get it done. But I got it done and I sent it off and I won the contest, which was terrific. It,
Wow.
it wasn't a huge contest, but it did have a substantial cash award with it, which really has
Great.
been helpful now as I've been, working on publicity and stuff like that.
Right.
So, so anyway, especially the lady in Chicago, her feedback was just really important
Hmm.
and very helpful and very
Great.
necessary.
Yeah.
So I was glad that they jumped in at the right time.
Yeah. Was it feedback that you had to kind of restructure things, or was it subtle stuff?
It was not really restructuring, but a lot of times when they would ask things like, I don't really understand why this character is responding this way right now. So it wasn't like massive
Okay.
rewrites, but very careful rewrites of certain portions of the book. And that was also good. Also, sometimes there would be things like, they would say, Connie, you have your character doing this and it seems like he's upset because of something that has happened before, but I don't know what he's referring back to. So then
Ah,
sometimes I would go back and add more in at an earlier point. Anyway, it was just very helpful feedback.
yeah. Those continuity checks are
Yes.
that was what I worried about too. And
Yeah.
having a couple people look it over kind of sets your mind at ease. It's like, I mean,
Yeah.
minor stuff like, oh, he had blue eyes in this scene, all of a sudden he has brown eyes
Yeah.
here.
Right. Right.
What? Oh, fix that. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Yes. And those mistakes are so easy to make.
They're
It's
so
kind of
easy to make.
crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because when you like, one of my guys has an injured hand,
Uh-huh.
in the first book, and so the second book, I'm going in, I'm like, which hand did he hurt?
Right,
And
right.
so
Yes.
to go back and look through, and how was it hurt? And so I have to like, I'm doing research on my own stuff that I happen to make up as I went, and it's like, oh my gosh, what a it can be.
Yeah,
You're going down a rabbit hole for 2 hours on something you wrote, so you get it
yeah,
right in the next one.
yeah,
It can be a very slow process.
yeah. Or you realize you've described what something looks like, but it's actually dark. So the character would not have been able to see what it looks like.
Or what I do often is I say that he sat down, and at the end it says he's standing. It's like, did he
Yeah,
just stand
right,
back up? He's
right.
tucked into bed. What
I
am I
know.
doing here?
Yeah,
Is he standing on the bed now? Is he making a proclamation? So
right.
it's so easy to do. Your your mind does this weird mental gymnastics sometimes when you're creating on the fly, and
Hmm.
it's so challenging. For the family in Budapest, they're huddled together for X amount of weeks. Was
Hmm.
that based off true events that you read?
Yes,
It was.
yes.
Okay, okay. I imagine it
Um,
was.
in fact, there was an historical book that I read, a history book that I read that if I hadn't found it, I probably could not have written the book.
Sure.
It's titled The Siege of Budapest. It was written by a Hungarian historian and then
Hmm.
translated. And it was just invaluable because it described day by day where the
Oh,
different armies were, what was going on. And it also has an excellent chapter on how the population of the city lived through it.
yeah.
And that chapter was so helpful because the author used a lot of eyewitness accounts. He interviewed people, he quoted from their diaries just about what they experienced.
Wow.
And so that book was tremendously helpful. I also found a few other books that I just drew on all the time. And then there were other books that I read just to help me understand things. But for the actual details, I relied heavily on a few books.
Mm.
When I interviewed Hungarians, I did ask them about the siege, but most of them were young enough at that point that they didn't remember it all that well.
Sure. Yeah.
But I did find a lot of good details from reading.
Okay. Oh, I imagine so. That will be that kind of book, and that concentrated of one book of an
Yes.
area is probably priceless to historical fiction writers.
Hmm.
If you could
Hmm.
refer to just one or two references versus 30, it makes it a lot easier to find and locate when you're actually in the throngs
Right.
of writing a scene or something that's very important.
Yeah, it also has some excellent photographs in it, and
Yeah.
those were super helpful too when I needed to
Oh,
describe things.
yeah. Yeah, I've seen a lot of authors, historical and I mean fantasy I've seen too. I've actually had to do it where they've actually got maps of
Yes.
the
Hmm.
city, or actually mystery writers too. Shoot.
Hmm.
If you're describing a real place or even a
Yeah.
fictional place,
Hmm.
having a map of it will help you, like, okay, they're going north here, they're going to pass these buildings,
Right.
in the battle this was blown out, or
Hmm.
whatever.
Hmm.
So it can add an element of realism to the story that maybe someone who's actually there or who knows the area, they can
Yes.
really relate to, which is kind of, I think, kind of a neat aspect to when you're reading something like this.
Yeah, and I will say I was able to go over there and
Oh,
walk around the city,
cool.
which was very, very helpful. Because of course, looking at maps, I looked at maps all the time while I
Sure.
was working on it, but to actually go over there and walk around gave me a much better feel for how close or far away things actually were.
Engage your senses, engage
Right.
everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Immerse yourself in that culture too. I mean,
Hmm.
over in Europe in general, I know I've been to Italy, and everything is a lot closer.
Oh,
There's
yes.
places where
Yeah,
you can just walk and bike, That's it.
right. And the
Yeah.
streets are narrower and
Yeah.
just, it's just more compressed than here. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, we're used to our space.
yeah,
Americans like their space, and Europeans are have a lot smaller of a bubble
yeah.
than us. There was a funny story actually about ATM lines at Scotland. Apparently, I mean this is not
Oh,
Hungary, but in Scotland. So in America, usually when someone's got the ATM, there is a line about 6 feet back that starts. Then when it's your
mhm,
turn, you step up that 6 feet. You've got
yeah.
6 feet behind you between you and the next person, maybe even
Mhm,
more. They do their
mhm.
thing and they go. Well, apparently, I can't remember, it was a teacher or a friend who was telling about this. In Scotland, it's like, no, they basically look like they're looking over your shoulder at your
Oh,
pin.
wow.
Like that's just they're not doing it, but they're
Yeah,
that close to you.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's just so funny the bubble you
Hmm.
grow up with, the comfort level.
Yes.
It's just different from culture to culture. So
Yeah.
yeah, I like that. That's hilarious. So it's when did it come out? When exactly did it come out?
The release date was April 9th. So it's
Oh,
been
cool.
out just almost exactly a month now.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic. And feedback so far. Have you gotten feedback yet?
Yeah, it's actually been wonderful.
Great.
While it was under construction with the publisher, I had some people read my manuscript and they wrote wonderful endorsements
Great.
um, for me. But also now that people have started buying it and reading it, they're loving it. They're getting very
Yay.
engrossed, and I've had some very nice reviews for it. But yeah, people seem to be very, very interested in both storylines in the book. So that's been wonderful for me to hear.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. We can, as authors, we love feedback, especially if it's good feedback.
Oh, yeah.
And then reviews are priceless. If we can get
Yes.
reviews anywhere and everywhere, whether it be online or in person, that just
Yeah.
helps us get motivated to write more, which
Sure.
actually I want to note, you're starting a third novel.
Yes. One of my sons, my middle son, lives in Peru.
Wow.
And so this story is set in Peru. My son is a missionary, he and
Oh,
his
cool.
wife. They have been there for about coming up on 15 years.
Yeah.
All three of their children were born there. And so my husband and I have visited them on a number of occasions over the years. They live in the Andes. Um,
Wow.
so it's very interesting. They work with the Quechua people there. It's beautiful and it's very harsh climate, and it's just a fascinating place and a fascinating culture. So yeah, this story is set in Peru. I have written about 80 pages,
Great.
and so that's a good start. I'm nowhere near the finish of it,
Sure.
but I'm really loving working on it.
That's great. Peru, remind me if I'm wrong here. Machu Picchu?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And so yeah, my son lives in Cusco, which is
Oh,
where
okay.
you fly into to visit Machu Picchu. He and his family used to live in a smaller town that's about a 4-hour drive from Cusco
Okay.
and called Abancay.
Okay.
And that is where I have set my story. It's in a very poor region of Peru, but the people are poor, but they get by
Yeah,
and they have a strong family structure. I've enjoyed writing this story so far.
that's great. I love how when you look at other countries that aren't as rich as other ones, people still manage to
Yeah,
live pretty long and pretty happy lives and productive. And it's very communal,
yes,
very
very.
communal. Everyone's
Uh-huh.
got a purpose.
Hmm.
They enjoy themselves. Just because they don't have something doesn't mean that their life is any less rich. So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
that's what I've been seeing, news and documentaries. People are happiest when they don't have everything. They're working to something. Well, I'm curious. I want to know, help everyone else find your book. So where can people get copies of Fire Music, which again is a really awesome title?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so I just had my book launch down at King's Books
Yep.
in downtown Tacoma, and they still have some copies of it down there. So if people want to buy it here locally, that's a great place to go.
Perfect.
Um, they also have my first book, The Songs We Hide. The book can also be ordered through Amazon or Barnes and Noble. And also bookshop.org is another place where it can be purchased. It can also be purchased through my website, which is conniehamptonconnally.com. And Connolly is spelled Connally.
Excellent. Well, that is great. So definitely go support her and get some books. Are you able to sign some copies for people?
Yes, the ones down at King's Books I have already signed. If people here locally would like me to sign a copy of their book, they can just write to me through my website and we'll make it happen.
Fantastic. I like it a lot. Well, Connie, this has been really great to catch up again, and I'm really happy to see you're just cruising. You're writing a bunch, you're releasing stuff. This is great. I need to take a lesson out of your book. I
Well,
gotta
I don't know about that, Ryan. It's been pretty slow going, but it is great to talk to you, and I want you to keep writing too.
Me too. Well, I'd love to peer review whenever you get this next one done. I'd love to help you out if I have the time, but you can always
Okay,
ask and
great.
review people's stuff. It's just kind of cool to sample and see the
Yes.
progress of your books. When that one comes out, I'd
Okay.
love to talk to you again. So it'd be kind of
Okay.
neat. Yeah, that'd be
Thanks,
cool.
Ryan.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
All right, cool. Well, guys, I really hope you enjoyed this. Go get some wonderful historical fiction, not just fire music, but her first debut novel, The Songs We Hide, looking at historical Hungarian history. Very well done, very well written. I've sampled some of her work, and I'd love to actually dive in a little deeper. So when I have a moment or two to do
Yeah,
that as well. So hard, so many books. I'll never read everything, but I want to
I
read a
know.
lot. Again, Connie, thank you so much for coming on here. It's been wonderful talking with you.
Thanks. Thanks to you, Ryan. Okay.
All right. All right, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And as always, stay mighty and keep reading.